Welcome to Corporate Podcasting Smarter. For business communications, training, and marketing, Corporate Podcasting Smarter is for enterprise-level and professional organizations and is an official podcast from Podbean. We feature interviews with industry experts, learning and development use cases, podcast network advertising best practices, and helpful tips for how to get the most out of podcasting within your organization or media network.
Hello, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this live. We are so excited to be here today. My name is Norma Jean Blanky. I'm the head of events here at Podbean, and you are here for our November live stream, Structuring an Internal Podcast Initiative. We are so excited you're here today to join us as we speak to Vimal Parker, the Global Sales and Talent Acquisition Content Manager from Slalom. And they've very successfully launched their internal podcasting initiative. And she's here to tell us all about it, what that looked like, road mapping it, selling it to your team, and so much more. So stay tuned. Corporate Podcasting Smarter, and this series is brought to you by Podbean. We're one of the top hosting and monetization companies and home to enterprise podcast solutions. So if you want to know more, reach out to us at podbean.com today, and there's a link here in the description as well. So Vimal, hello and welcome.
Hello, Norma Jean. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We are so excited to talk to you today about how to structure an internal podcasting initiative because, we talk all the time about having an internal podcast, but from, the content side, from the company side of, first of all, getting the initiative off the ground, running the production of it, making sure the team's on board, listenership, it's definitely, a full experience and it, taking things out of conceptual, the conceptual aspect of, hey, this technology exists, right? You can have an internal podcast. You can distribute it securely, and an encrypted podcast to your network, to your company and your organization with, the convenience of a mobile app, all that stuff. We speak about that a lot, but we're so excited to speak to you today about, the experience that Slalom has had with internal podcasting, what it's been like, what the initiative's been like, how the team has really gotten on board. So we're just so excited to have you here today. Hello and welcome.
Well, hello. Yeah, it's a great topic. I'm excited about it. Very passionate about podcasting. So this is a good topic to start the day off with.
Yes. And for a lot of people out there who have podcasts or who are excited about podcasting, having a podcast at your organization or at your day job or within your corporate career is a great way to bring podcasting into your day job. So
totally is. I love how you just phrased that. I totally agree.
Yeah. And for everybody out there, we're going to tell you today, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about how Slalom did it. I'm so excited. So Vimal, first of all, tell us a little bit about, what you do at Slalom and what Slalom as a company is known for, because you guys are a really big global company.
Yeah, great question. So as you mentioned, I work for the Global Talent Acquisition and Global Sales team here at Slalom. And a little background on the company itself. We are a purpose-driven global consulting company, and we focus in really on strategy, technology, and business. So I'd say we're in about 45 markets around the world. We have about 14,000 employees, and we're growing fast. So a lot of opportunity to share our stories within our company and outside our company.
Yeah, absolutely. And your role is really to tell those stories, which is so cool.
Yeah. Well, so, the role was actually created because of the demand for storytelling at the company. So our CEO is really, really big about, the importance of telling our stories to our clients, our prospects, our people, our teams. So it really started from the top in the sense of, hey, let's get behind this. So I actually started off in talent management and working with the Atlanta market, one of our 45 markets. And we basically said, you know what, we need to figure out how to capitalize on the drive time in Atlanta. Because if anybody's living in Atlanta or familiar with Atlanta, it's an immense drive. And so prior to COVID, we had an average commute of 30 minutes a day. And so we were like, gosh, let's just, take advantage of that. So anyway, so my role, back to that question, was really kind of a catalyst to that was the demand that came out of the Atlanta market to do these in Atlanta. And then our talent acquisition leader, global, came in and said, well, let's take this on the road and expand it. So I'm sure we'll get into detail about that. But the role was created based on demand. And then I shifted from the local market to the global teams. And this is what I do is podcasting full time.
Fantastic. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, really, I think, the fact that so many organizations and Slalom's really at the forefront of this, of prioritizing storytelling, right? Because that's
Yeah.
how we connect. We
Yeah.
talk about this all the time at Podbean. There's a statistic out there that says, people are more likely to remember a fact, I think 20 times more when it's in a story.
When
So
it's in a
it's like,
story. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
that's
In the
such an
spoken word.
important aspect. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also
Hmm.
think, to take advantage of that windscreen time or windshield time, as a lot of people call it, the commute times for your organization can
Yeah.
be so valuable. Or if you have a sales force that's, driving or on the road.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and I think too, the drive time was a big deal a few years ago. And then obviously when we were all working from home, we shifted quite a bit. So it was a lot, just like every organization. It was like, well, how do you tell your stories in a more, I don't know, in a way that gets you away from the computer? So we kind of changed the way we promoted Slalom on Air to be more about like, take a break from your laptop, get away from the screen, take a walk with Slalom and do it in, a short walk, a long walk, whatever you need to, take your dog out for a walk. And be able to listen to our stories during those breaks. So we had to shift the way we were marketing them, but we have an internal and external podcast. So internally, we pushed it way more to getting out. And if you're not driving, then walk with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell us about the podcasting initiative and how it
Yep.
is now, and then we can talk about how it got started. Because I always like to know, where are we in this moment,
Sure.
and then how did we get
Yeah.
here?
Great question. I'd say where are we in this moment is we have two aspects of our podcast. We have an internal and an external. Our internal, and I'd say, Norma Jean, it's important to note that both, regardless of either one, there's really two common goals that we have for either one, and that is to build connections and to educate and inspire our people. So, based on that, where we are today is that we have probably 200 episodes that we share one way or the other
Yeah.
with our internal audience, we try to make them evergreen, so they are timeless. We hope.
Yeah.
In most cases. And then we have an external podcast that we just launched a few months ago. And the focus really is to pilot the concept. Our CEO
Mhm.
is all about be bold. And, once you go bold, either fail fast or succeed and keep going. And so we launched our podcast externally just a few months ago.
Mhm.
With Podbean, and basically it's focused in on our candidates, and so we have told probably 15 stories in the last 4 months, and basically try to set out a new episode once a week,
Mhm.
and we ask our talent acquisition, our recruiters, to help us elevate the message to our candidates about who we are and how do we really live up to our values with personal stories. So the nutshell is we've got two different types with various
Yeah.
story types. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the use case is so interesting, right? Because podcasting, has such a tremendous versatility and application within an
Yeah.
organization such as Slalom. It's
Yeah.
incredible, and just hearing from people who've joined the company, hearing what their recruitment process has been like, hearing how,
Yeah.
hey, working here is the experience that I knew I was getting into. There was
Right.
no
Yeah.
surprises. Like, these people are who they say they are. Their corporate culture is transparent and all of that. So I think it is
Yeah.
really important because, especially in today's world, sometimes you want a job and then you work somewhere and then, it's a common story that I've seen definitely on LinkedIn where it's just not a good fit, or maybe, you want to move on. So I think it's really important in terms of getting those employees and also keeping them as well.
Our talent acquisition leadership team is really, really a big fan of us being able to share these stories with folks that are thinking about joining a company like Slalom. Joining a company and making a job shift can be a big decision. And I think
Yeah.
having the ability to hear the spoken word, the authenticity, the vulnerability of our leaders, sharing these stories even before you join is a great way. Like, there's nothing more powerful than, hey, I really enjoyed talking with you about Slalom. Here's an episode from our CEO or from our chief diversity inclusion officer, or here's stories about, people on the workforce that have overcome, serious, some opportunities at home while Slalom was there to support them. So it's really good
Yeah.
stories to be able to share to candidates and with
Yeah.
candidates as a way for them to get a feel of who we are before they go to the next step. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it really
Yeah.
broadens their exposure to the overall organization.
Yeah.
Right. And podcasting's so
Completely.
personal. We're listening to a podcast on the same device that we call our moms
Yeah.
on, that we talk to our kids on.
Yeah.
It's just something where, that and having somebody else's voice, you can really, you get so much from it. There's the intonation, hearing
Yeah.
their story, it really helps you connect and just understand the organization and the values and the
Yeah.
people that you're hearing on a podcast. So absolutely from a recruitment
Yeah.
standpoint. And in terms of the internal podcast, I think that that's such an
Yeah.
important aspect as well, because, when the pandemic happened, everybody went remote, a lot of people in the corporate world. And so not
Mhm.
everybody, but a lot of people in the corporate world went fully remote.
Yeah.
And, you go from spending time with a person to spending time in front of a screen for 8 hours a day, sometimes more.
I know, right?
And so,
Sometimes.
to be able to say like, hey, take a break, take a break with us. Like you can, we've got resources for you, or you can still feel like you're working or you're being productive, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in front of a screen, right? Take a
Right.
walk, take your dog for a walk, do the dishes,
Yeah,
while you're listening to our
absolutely.
podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the application there is just fantastic, especially considering, where the world is. And even now, with commutes, it's the same as well, right?
Yeah.
So we're
Yeah.
still facing that opportunity to utilize time where people aren't in front of a screen, or to give them the opportunity to not be in front of a screen as well. So that's
Yeah.
definitely a big one.
Absolutely. Our internal has been our biggest focus for 4.5 years.
Yeah.
It's the external was just a few months ago, and we're learning every step of the way about learning, how to really gain an audience and how to keep an
Yeah.
audience externally. Internally, though, I think we have learned. You had asked me earlier about some of the how it started.
Yeah.
I will add that we've come a long way in our learning journey. It's interesting about when we launched it internally within one market, we knew clearly we needed to tell stories about examples of how we fuel innovation, or, how we help build better tomorrows for our clients. But we know we needed to do that in a secure environment. And we knew that it had to be something that we could count on, that our folks could hear, and they could hear in sound bites and small bites, in a way that's told by the teams that are actually doing the work. Nothing
Yeah.
more powerful than hearing from the exact teams. So we knew that we needed to really capitalize on that. And so one
Yeah.
market was the catalyst. And then our global talent acquisition leadership team had heard about it from Atlanta's GM, and said, hey, we understand you guys are implementing an internal podcast, and we wanted to be able to do it, but we need to make sure it's secure. And that is something that we can do. So enter Podbean. We did a lot of research on trying to ensure that we are telling those stories to our people, but in a way that was very secure. So anyway, then our soon thereafter, word got around. We obviously didn't develop podcasts at Slalom, but come up with the idea. But what we did do is we were the first office that said, you know what, let's actually use an application, an app. And that's already passed InfoSec. And I know we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but we wanted to make sure it was secure. And so our global teams, talent team said, you know what, let's go ahead and tell these stories, but in a global fashion. So we took it from there and learned a lot about who our audience is, what's the content that we need to be telling, and also what our customers, which are our consultants for internal, what they really want to know and what they really want to hear about.
Oh yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Absolutely. I mean, employees are internal customers. Right?
Yeah, they totally are.
Yeah, absolutely. They have to be happy to keep the organization running, and to, I think nowadays, especially, in the current climate, if people aren't happy, they may not be the most productive, or they may not stay with your organization maybe as long as they could. So it's definitely important.
Norma Jean, you can be more right on. Workforce engagement is such a passion of mine. And I think engaging our people, whether you're, just starting within the first week, or well, actually, in this case, even before you've joined Slalom, because we have candidates that hear about our episodes from our recruiters. But if you're joining us and you're hearing these stories, you get exclusive access to Slalom on Air in the internal podcast, where we do talk about how we're impacting change in organizations to feel more connected. There's nothing more powerful than having a consultant in Charlotte, let's say in our market there, share a story about what we're doing with an amazing client, and then share that with our team in Japan. And there's a commonality because of the industry that we're in. So we talk about the industry, we talk about that we're trying to build connections. And so we're hoping that a Charlotte team will reach out to the Japan team to say, hey, can we learn more and figure out how we can bring our best as Slalom One, as one Slalom, to any type of opportunity that or discussion that we have with our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it kind of creates the opportunity for like discussion in a way and collaboration as well.
Definitely. It starts the conversation, right?
Yeah.
It starts the conversation. Most of our stories are only 10 minutes long because we're just very, very sensitive to, how long someone has to devote to a company podcast. We would love it if we could make them longer. And I think we can, especially if the content is rich. And the content is rich, but at the same time, we know just from our analytics that there's a pretty significant drop off after a certain point. So we try to do the best we can to make the story very compelling from the beginning, from a content perspective. And we double down on trying to promote to the teams that actually need to hear it. One of the biggest learnings I've had is that you put out a podcast doesn't mean everybody in your company is going to listen to it. I really used to come home every night and look at the Podbean results and go, what? I need more, and then, leadership would say, well, do we have more? And then I'm like, well, wait a minute. Does everybody need to listen to this story? Well, it's a nice to have, but what would be the real, measurement of success is we build connections. We inform the team that needs to hear it at the right time, in the right place, in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the fact that everybody learns differently, I think podcasting really gives the opportunity for audio specifically, within an organization, on the scale of Slalom securely as well.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about in a minute, but you did mention the analytics as well. So, it's such a big component. And, can you just speak a little bit about how you've tailored content to the analytics? Because the analytics internally for podcasting, for anybody out there who's familiar with statistics and analytics for public podcasting, it's very different on the internal side.
Very much so. Yeah. We actually, we look at the Podbean's analytics, which are pretty darn powerful, right? So we also, because it requires authentication, we are able to, with Power BI, be able to see who's listening by role, by person, how long they're listening. So we're able to really figure out that, we should probably double down on the audience that we know are listening. We also can tell you when, in the sense of when the hot times are, when someone is tuning in, and also by, just geographically, in what area of the world people are really listening in. So we double down on where we know it's really great. We also try to double down where we know there's a big opportunity. And if we know that there's not a lot of listeners in a given market, we try to actively promote there and see if we can get some new listeners that maybe didn't even know about Slalom on Air.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you also said about, using those analytics to your advantage, right?
Yeah.
You see a drop off at 10, 12 minutes, you make the episodes 10 minutes.
Exactly.
It's something where you can really create content that's tailored to your listenership, to the people within your internal organization, so they can get the most out of the podcast.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, one thing about what we have found is that, just trying something that you feel like, wow, you've heard some feedback, we want to hear from our leaders. We want to hear from, where we've made an impact from an industry perspective, let's just say. Yeah. And we try to tell a story about like, hey, this might be a good topic. And what's so good about podcasting is this medium is so agile. It's so flexible. We're able to even tell a story. We had a huge client event a couple months ago, and it was a great opportunity to reach out to our clients. And we had client participation. We had some amazing speakers from the outside. And it was, it was inclusive in the sense that we were all able to see it on stream afterwards. But what we wanted to do was to really tell the behind the scenes of what was happening in an event like that. We wanted to talk to the people who put it all together and say, hey, you put together this amazing event. Tell us, how did it really go down? How was it? We had some great speakers. And so we're able to turn that story around within 24 hours.
Wow.
And one of them was actually in Munich. One of our guests, the host, was actually in London, and our audio engineer and myself are in Atlanta. And so we were able to get us all together on this podcast and say, "Tell us about this event," and then edit it and turn it around and promote the heck out of it within our organization within 24 hours.
Wow.
I think that's a pretty great example of how podcasting can meet you where you're at.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And especially when you're working with a global team like that, to put on and produce an event of that scale, it's something where, okay, we want to tell the story of how we pulled this off, how we got this off the ground, how we successfully launched this initiative and this event.
Yeah.
So people want to hear that, they really do. They want to know the behind the scenes as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the nuts and bolts and the structure of recording and building out the podcasting team at Slalom, creating content goals as well.
So once we identify that there's a story that we want to go after, that we feel like, gosh, this would be a really good story for our sellers or for our candidates, we schedule it. The nuts and bolts is that we do a lot of planning ahead of time. I may or may not know the team very well, but when I hear a topic, I like, gosh, it'd be great to be able to get to know the person that we're talking to before we actually record, and build a relationship. So we do a planning call with myself and the guest before we even bring the host in, because I really want to make them sure that they feel comfortable and that they know what to expect as a result of this episode. And to hear the passion around a certain topic that they really want to elevate or illuminate, I guess, through the conversation. So if I know what the passion point of the conversation is, I want to make sure that our host also has that opportunity to be able okay, that's a great, that's great insights. When we do record, it still sounds fresh. It still sounds very conversational, but it is pointed to specific aspects that that ignite a good conversation with the guest and the host. So we do planning calls. We do the actual recording with our audio engineer and myself, and we basically do the planning call. We do the recording 2 days later. So we try to keep the planning call and the recording in the same week, but just separate, because that way it still seems fresh when you actually begin the recording. And the conversation still feels like it's a first time hearing it.
Absolutely.
And then we have a freelance editor and myself who actually edit the episodes, and then we market them heavily as a result once they're launched.
Perfect. And in terms of putting the team together, building out the podcasting team in terms of production and content, what was that like in terms of launching the initiative and, in terms of internal podcasting and making sure that, you have everything set up for success?
Yeah, that's a good one. We're at Slalom, we are so gifted by the fact that we have an army of volunteers, an army of people within this company that say, you know what, I want to get involved because they are passionate around a certain topic. When we first launched Slalom on Air, we didn't really go in it with, we're going to go build out this entire team and then build the product. We did the opposite, right? We actually sent an email out to a ton of people in the Atlanta market and said, hey, we're thinking about putting on a podcast. Do you have any interest in being involved? And we got so many responses from amazing consultants at the company that said, hey, we do podcasts on our side. We have our own podcast, individual. And so there was nothing more powerful than to be able to have people in a room that can brainstorm or ideate on an idea of how to actually birth this idea of a podcast internally. And so we put all that group together. And to this day, a majority of them are still involved 4.5 years later. And they're actually doing this as in addition to their full-time jobs which is being a full-time consultant here at Slalom. So
Wow.
we have an audio engineer, we have freelancer, we have a writer that listens to our episodes and helps us craft the message to be able to articulate the why listen.
Mhm.
What's in it for me as as an employee here, as a member of the workforce at Slalom, if I'm a
Yeah.
recruiter, if I'm a candidate, like why listen? And then we
Yeah.
take those um, aspects that are pulled out from the writer, and we really try to promote heavily to get folks to tune in, because now they feel like they know what the content is and it's worth their time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's important, I think, from an internal perspective because people's time is so precious,
Yeah.
especially in the corporate world, just sometimes, you're working and you think, oh gosh, another work thing. But if it's interesting and it's fun and it's
Right.
exciting and there's a takeaway,
Hmm.
it's something where people get excited about it and it doesn't feel like
Yep.
work, you know?
Yeah, well, you want people, exactly. People want to stay connected. They want to be
Yeah.
in the know. And I
Yeah.
think being able to say, "Hey, did you hear that episode?" If we can
Yeah.
generate a buzz, then I think that's a measurement of success. I don't really look at the downloads and the listens as much as I used to, as much as I would look for, going back to the guest and saying,
Yeah.
did people reach out to you? Did they ask you to learn more? Do you have any follow up conversations that are planned? Did anybody say, "Hey, I didn't know you before, but I feel like I know you now"? And it's overwhelming, the kind of response we get from folks that say, "Yes, I definitely did." I'd love to build a loyal listener base, not
Yeah.
just one episode though. So if we can keep the cadence of having one a week and having our people feel like they are in the know and feeling connected on a regular
Yeah.
basis, they'll only listen to the ones that they feel like they need to at the time.
Mhm.
We have felt like just in time is really a good thing when you're about to meet with a client or you're about to meet with a team about a certain, let's say, industry or capability or
Yeah.
topic about how we
Yeah.
fuel innovation or why data is important. They can search using the Podbean app, and they can search because we tag every single episode with metadata that allows you to do the search and to be able to say, okay, here's all the stories that have to do with a certain topic,
Yeah.
and I want to listen to these before I walk into a meeting or a Zoom call,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Absolutely.
talk about this topic. So yeah,
Absolutely. And, I think the communal aspect of that is so important, just
yeah,
creating that feeling of community in an organization, that feeling
yep,
of being connected or of having, oh, I really resonate with that person's experience or,
yeah,
that feeling of connection is so important. And you spoke a little bit, I mean, that's incredible about the podcasting consultants. I love that so much. And that's really one of the things that for us at Podbean is so exciting because so many podcasters like, oh, how can I bring podcasting into my, my corporate job or my day job? And so it really is an opportunity. And in terms of how the initiative is owned internally, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
yeah. So it is primarily it's actually shared ownership through our global sales team, our global talent acquisition team, and our global marketing team. So it's so amazing when you have different teams that have different aspects of why podcasts are important. The global marketing team, from a building our brand perspective externally, it's powerful. It's also powerful when it comes to comms and how we're sharing big news that's coming out about a given topic. So comms obviously sees it as an opportunity to really elevate. We do great stories about raising your voice, which are inclusion, diversity, and equity stories. Every time we've have a really big event, or externally or internally, that's coming up, we try to tailor an episode to our employee resource groups, our raising your voice groups, and that is also a really key reason why global comms is also very invested, because it gives us a chance to share the spoken word from our people. When it comes to global sales, it's pretty powerful to tell our sellers how we won big projects, and
Yeah.
maybe what makes Slalom different from what's our unique differentiator of why we were able to win the work. So we do
Yeah.
double down on the selling community, and we try to help share that with our sellers. Again, that's internal
Yeah.
behind SSO. So we do feel like
Yeah.
we share that. When it comes to talent acquisition, as I mentioned earlier, it's probably the most powerful is our external is to share it with our candidates. But we
Yeah.
also internally, just wanted to add this, for our talent acquisition team to hear these stories and to feel like, wow, having this knowledge helps them have these type of conversations with candidates so they can pass along these stories, right? It's not just a matter of forwarding a link to a candidate, but our
Yeah.
recruiters listening to these stories and saying, wow, I'm filled with pride. I now know what we do, and or particular areas of impact that we've had, and I want to be able to retell that story, masked or unmasked, to our candidates. So it's a great conversation to have when you listen to these stories as a result of an episode.
Absolutely. And there's just a couple of things there that I want to reflect back on. I mean, just the impact, from the recruiter's side, right, of hearing the story and the experience of the candidate. I think that feedback also really helps recruitment overall, right?
Yeah.
And then on the sales side as well, just having feedback, positive feedback, number one, but then also the opportunity to refine your processes,
Yep.
processes,
Yep.
refine your processes and hone in on, what is working, what does make an impact. And on
Yeah.
the sales side, the value proposition, what made the difference in a sale, and how other
Yep.
people within the sales community and the sales force within the organization can utilize those value propositions within their
Yep.
own, sales endeavors and portfolio. Like the impacts
Yep.
are just incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
very cool.
Mm.
So you mentioned SSO as well,
Yeah.
on the internal side, which we do have at Podbean because it is secure, but it is easy to use as well. And I
Yeah.
want to talk a bit about procurement and infosec because that's such an
Hmm.
important aspect of internal podcasting, especially with an
Hmm.
organization of the scope and the scale and just the honestly the level that Slalom performs at, and the
Yeah.
where you are in the market,
Hmm.
and kind of what's expected on that level. Infosec is so important.
Yeah.
So, many companies, including Slalom, have such strict standards, for security.
Yeah.
It's
Immense.
not something, right? Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
at
It's
Podbean, people
immense
ask,
and it's intense.
yeah, 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 absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is something that we're aware of, and we always work with our clients on this. It's something where we're gonna meet you at your level.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are so excited about podcasting, and we're like, "Great, when does your initiative start?" And they're like, "Oh, we want to get started next week." And they would say, "Okay, how long's your procurement process?"
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's right.
I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like,
Yeah.
because it's so important, and you want to be secure, and you want to make sure that you can take that deep breath, and that, everyone within the organization is comfortable internally sharing information, communicating within the platform, and that it's secure.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit what that process was like for you.
It was painful, but it was good. It was good, and it was all worth it. It was when we first launched
Mhm,
in Atlanta. That
mhm.
was the biggest. We thought, oh, we just put it on YouTube, or we put it on Stream, or we'll put it on Wistia, and we're like, oh yeah, oh no. We found out after like maybe two or three.
Mm.
It was like I got a text message from one of our GMs, and he was like, take it down now.
Okay.
And so that was learning the hard way about, like,
Yeah.
oh gosh, even if we're doing something on a pilot basis,
Mhm.
we were just trying to figure out where we were going to be able to host the episodes,
Yeah.
back then. But after the second episode and getting that text to say take it down, it was like, oh wow. And learning experience. If I
Yeah.
could do it over again, definitely would have switched that, reached out to infosec first,
Yeah.
and our security team. I mean, can you imagine at Slalom? It's an amazing team.
I mean,
S-
the
was this
standard that you guys uphold as
Yeah.
an organization, it's important, and not
Yeah.
only internally, but also your clients trust you as well to uphold
Oh
that
my gosh.
standard.
Our
So for
partners. Yeah.
organizations, big or small, it's incredibly vital to make sure that the security
Yeah.
not only fits within your own organization's security protocols, but the technology is applicable and useful. So that's so important. And at
Yeah.
Podbean, we don't compromise.
Right,
it's
and I think that's
yeah,
why InfoSec absolutely got involved
yeah,
afterwards. We wrote a business plan
yeah,
together and
yeah,
said, "Here's what we're looking at." And then InfoSec and Podbean worked together
yeah,
quite intimately on ensuring data security from the get go. I mean, it
yeah,
it took a few months. I would recommend bringing InfoSec in the
yeah,
beginning because what we don't know. I mean, at a company like Slalom, when I joined, we had 22 markets. Now we have 45, and I think we
yeah,
had 6,000 employees. Now we have 14,000. So I say that to say is like we're growing fast, and so is our infosec and our teams to make sure security. We have a great global legal team that gets involved on every episode before we launch externally. We have to have signed permissions by our clients,
yeah,
and any voice that we have that's shared externally. So internally, it's very secure, and
yeah,
it's to me it was easier to go from internal to external than it would have been external to internal because we already knew the app. We already knew that we could turn on the switch to external pretty easily
yeah,
once we knew that everything else was secure. So,
yeah,
bringing InfoSec in the beginning, there was a lot of conversations with Podbean. We I think that took a few months, as I was mentioning, and then after we got the green light, many of our markets have experimented with the idea of a platform for their particular use, and all of them have to go through InfoSec. So I think
yeah,
we always tend to lean them and point them back to Podbean just because it's already passed our security team, and we know
yeah.
it works. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of things that I just want to reflect on. I mean, number one, infosec is so important. like, and we're
vital.
very familiar with this. So, when you're looking at hosting internal podcasting within your organization, security can be the make or break factor. It really
Mhm.
is that, important. It is that vital, you know, it- and
Yep.
and if you you can't meet your organization's strict information security protocols, you can't launch the initiative. Like it's just
Well,
like
so we had a very intense. We had 3 consultants do, some discovery
Mhm.
before Podbean was selected. We knew we had to go through InfoSec and write the business case, and the security was number 1. That was
Yeah.
all it was really boiled down to. You can have great audio, you can have great, user experience from the app, but we wouldn't be able to have the green light unless we knew it was secure. So 3 consultants got involved. They teamed up to look at, I think, 10 different platforms for us and to determine what avenue and path should we go to from a podcast provider,
Yeah.
hosting provider. And Podbean was at the top in the sense of from a security, just from looking at previous reviews. I think if I recollect internal podcasting, Slalom and Podbean, we were at the beginning together.
Yeah.
So we were learning together how to make sure that we can pull this off. And security, though, was already in place.
Yeah.
So it was just that we were, as a user, were one of the first to come in and say, as a company as huge as Slalom,
Yeah.
can we take this together and go on this path together? So really glad that we did that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been,
Mm,
such a successful initiative for you guys. It's really exciting. And at Podbean, in terms of our security, we're so uncompromising. It's really been,
yeah,
something that has made the difference. I can just say, and for anybody out there who's exploring internal podcasting, no matter who you go with, just be clear. And also check
yeah,
in with your information security team, check in with legal. What are the requirements for your organization? Because we'll meet them, and we'll have those conversations with you. But when you're working interdepartmentally, it's so important just to loop in those departments just to make sure that
yeah.
everybody's on the same page.
Yep. Anytime that we do any external episodes, we start with the relationship lead and ask for signed permissions from the client before we go any further on planning calls or recording.
Yeah.
Having an understanding if the client is willing to share their story with us themselves and us being able to share that story, I think having that common understanding in the beginning is a really good thing. It's a great relationship conversation for the relationship lead within Slalom to be speaking to a client and saying, hey, we'd love to share our story together. In order to do that, would you be okay if we did a podcast, and can we sign these permissions before we did that? And I'm talking about external. And so we start from that in the beginning, and then we're able to say, okay, we have that relief. And then we actually go to the global legal team and we say, hey, before we actually record, this is the topic. Are we okay to proceed? So there's many layers, but once you nail those layers down and those particular steps, it's easier from there.
Yeah. And it's on autopilot. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just something where, depending on the requirements of your organization, it's just something to be aware of. And in terms of, if you had to go back and make sure, or recommend best practices for anybody looking at implementing internal podcasting, what would be, I think you mentioned like looping in InfoSec, looping in legal, from the get-go. Are there any other best practices or things that you might go back in time and implement or recommend?
That's a great idea. I think, a great question. I think, when we first launched the podcast internally, everyone was our audience. And we were like, gosh, this is going to be relevant. And then I think it's important to know who your audience is. And it's okay to just pick a segment of the audience and say, and like in our situation, it is sellers, it's our talent acquisition team, and it's our candidates. And if we could double down on that in the beginning, I think it would have been, I don't know, it feels like being able to say, who's my audience, what message they need to hear, why do they need to hear it? I think it really helps you tell a very crystal clear story to that audience versus trying to build something for everyone and then find out it's only segmented. So if I could go back, I think having a clear definition of who my audience is, clear measurements of success on how do we feel like we can all celebrate together and say, hey, we've got something that is engaging and is working. And I think also audio quality has really, being that everybody's working from home or many are, I think that having the ability to share audio equipment, like maybe a travel kit of headphones, speakers to your clients instead of asking them, hey, can you find something?
Right. Hey, what kind of mic are you using? Or, can you not use the speaker on your laptop on speaker out loud while we're recording? Right. Exactly. You have a good set of headphones. That's such a great idea, and I think, what comes out so clearly to me is, in the work from home wave that we all experienced, it's something where, we don't know everybody's audio setup, right?
Right.
And I think for Zoom calls, there were definitely some best practices that kind of went around depending on your organization or even just on LinkedIn. There were some best practices that went out about, have a good set of headphones, make sure, a bunch of different things, be on time for the Zoom, all those things. But I think from a recording perspective, just having a checklist and then also, internally for the team, hey, here's a kit, or hey, we're doing an interview next week. Here's a set of headphones and a travel mic. We just want to make sure that you're set up. I love that. When you're done, pop them in the mail back to our team. I think that, and if everything's internal, you can absolutely do that. It's so cool. Just to make sure you have the consistency of sound as well.
Consistency in sound. That's a perfect way. And that was, and the answer was more to the question about learning experience. We didn't do that from the beginning. It was always, hey, do you have something? Can you borrow something? Can you step into the office? Can you go buy something at Best Buy? It was always like, and then let's get our audio engineer to test your audio. There's so many steps involved. And I think now looking back, having a travel kit of just one or two that you can send to each other, like you said, with instructions about how to use it, really does help because and we even have clients on our recordings now. So if you go, listen to Slalom on Air externally, in many cases we have our clients joining, and so having a client go find a mic, isn't the best and most ideal. It would be great to say, check your mail, check your house. It's going to be, it's your doorstep, and try it out. So I think that's a really big learning experience as well as is the audio equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great best
Yeah.
practice for internal within your organization because, there's already equipment being exchanged and on loan. There's everybody
Yeah.
already has a company laptop, right? So, it's just another, additional company device that is going to help
Yep.
create that incredible content and consistency, within the sound of your podcast. So that's
Yeah.
such an
Yeah.
incredible best practice. I'm just, so
And
cool.
I have one last one, if I may
Okay.
add.
Yeah,
Best practice
please.
is really marketing the episode.
Yeah.
What I have found, if you have a great story and you have great audio and you have it, but it's like, does anybody even know about it? So I think realizing before you even record it, we do talk with the guest about like, who's your audience for this episode? Like, this is a great story, but who do you find yourself telling and retelling the story to? And then
Oh, I
we
love that.
together come up
Yeah.
with, here's the audience that we want to really promote it to and
Mhm.
with once we tell the story. So they're part of the journey with you. They want that same episode to be successful. They want that their episode to be something that's promoted. So they'll give you, a whole array of like a variety of possibilities of, industry, offices, markets, people. And so we put together equally as much time in how to promote the episode once it's done as we do to actually recording it. So marketing it in a company newsletter, in town hall meetings, and meetings that are going on within each market, to have them, what we do is we put together a biweekly email that goes out to everyone who has a Slalom on Air podcast episode,
Mhm.
podcast actually loaded. And so we're able to send to them every 2 weeks an email that says, here's the latest episodes. And so we do to actively promote those episodes as well through email, through our SharePoint site, our website, on stream. So we have multiple ways to access it and multiple
Yeah.
ways to get the word out about it.
Oh, that's so important because I think
Yeah.
also with how busy everybody is in
Yeah.
today's world, right? It may be something where you're like, oh, let me open the podcast. And then you get a phone call, right? Or,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you're like, oh, let me go back to that work email or whatever it is, right? And so,
Oh, Norma Jean, I think you have to see it 3 times before someone says, you know what, I've seen this episode come through in 3 different
yeah,
ways. Let me listen to it. And I think the most powerful one isn't going to be, what's that phrase that says you send an email to everyone and it really goes to no one? So I hear that phrase a lot to say,
yeah,
because, global emails, they're powerful, but,
yeah,
you skim them because you're very busy and you're thinking, wow, I've got a lot going on. I'll come back to that later.
yeah,
Then all of a sudden you see it again in a different email and you say, okay, well, maybe it's time that I invest some time. And then by the time the third time comes, through a different angle, and it's nothing more powerful than to someone to forward a link to an episode and say,
yes.
this is really powerful. I would
A
love to hear
personal
your
word of
story.
mouth
Yeah. Yep.
recommendation. Yes,
Yeah. That's the most
absolutely.
powerful. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think
Mm-hmm.
it is something that, people would think, oh, it's internal. People are automatically going to listen, but communications don't always work that way.
Mm-mm.
I don't think they
No.
really ever work that way, and that's
Yeah.
why we have internal communications. Right? So,
Well, right on. I mean, I know in the old days, it'd be
yeah,
like you put it out there in your company and you're like, oh, everybody's going to listen or read.
yeah,
We've shifted a lot. We've done a lot with videos. Companies done a great job with video
yeah,
and the written word and blogging and
yeah,
.com stories. But when it
yeah,
comes down to, this is just one additional medium to many different channels in a environment. But I think being able to have this as a platform that you can use, it's low risk. It's very, as long as you get the InfoSec,
yeah.
it's also something that I feel like, once you get the buy-in from your leadership team that says, you know what, I want us to keep doing this. I think you can fly with the podcast in a comms world.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the use case is just amazing, especially because we're on screen so much. It's just
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
it's just really
Yeah.
incredible. And I want to kind of ask you next, what have been kind of the defined measurements of success for the initiative? Because you guys have 14,000 employees and you mentioned, really honing in on a niche
Mhm.
with the sales, with the sales employees and the sales community.
Mhm.
But then like what kind of listenership is deemed a success and how do you define those success parameters?
Yeah. Well, we use the Podbean data to give us
Yeah.
initial data, right, about
Yeah.
the information. But we do have an amazing Power BI team that actually is able to dissect about who's listening and when. So one
You have
measurement
people
success.
combing through it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, they can tell you the role. I mean, now that it's, by employee, we
Yeah.
can tell you who's a first time listener, who's
Yeah.
how many episodes you've listened to by person, within again, this is internal.
Yeah.
So we're able to see this kind of information. So we're able to say, okay, look, this is the number of X number of sellers we have in this organization. How many of our sellers are actually, do they have the app loaded? And are they listening? And if they are listening,
Mm.
how many episodes do they listen to? How often? So our measurements of success, and the same thing with candidates. Talent acquisition. We know how many recruiters we have. So if you know your listener base, in the
Mm.
sense of, we're not trying to measure it by 14,000. I gave up on that a long time ago. It is
Yeah.
it is more about, if you know your target audience. In our case, is sellers, it's candidates, and it's our recruiters. The only one of the
Mm.
three that I do not have a finite number on yet is candidates, because
Yeah.
these are external.
Yeah.
It's passive candidates, it's active candidates.
Yeah.
So we use measurements like in social media from impressions,
Yeah.
shares that
Yeah.
are. We promote every episode to our TA team and ask them to promote it on their social media. And so the last 15 episodes we've had externally, out of, I'd say, 350 recruiters, I'd say 200 of them usually forward an episode out
Yeah.
on their LinkedIn profile and promote it. So we're very thankful and so appreciative when they hear something, they say, "Hey, I want to promote it and share it with all of external." So measurements of success would be that, but they're also
Yeah.
the ones that go unspoken when it comes to, when I say not measurable, is
Mm.
the connections that are made.
Yeah.
The I didn't knows, the connections. We do send out a quick survey to the guest about 3 weeks after an episode has been promoted,
Mhm.
and we ask the guest if there's been any connections.
Mm.
Did you have anybody reach out to you? We don't want to qualify or quantify that, but as much as, hey, did you get a reach that you're looking for? Did
Yeah.
you connect with others?
Yeah.
So we put in those testimonials. We also look to see what the data is as far as, how many hits or reach outs did they get as a result of their episode. So that's another measurement of success as well.
Absolutely. And I think happy guests
Yeah.
are going to share it and they're going to feel really fulfilled as well. Having people come up to you and say, "I heard your story." And then, just the impact and the ripple effect
Yeah.
from that is
Yeah.
really endless, right? Because maybe, somebody from another team or within a different department is going to spark a collaboration from
Yep.
there, so
Exactly. And Norma
yeah.
Jean, you mentioned something, and I wanted to say this about the importance, if I could do it all over again too, and this all has to do
Yeah.
with this conversation, is onboarding.
Yeah.
You have so many new joiners that are coming into the organization, and they're thirsty for understanding how your company operates,
Yeah.
the leadership team. So, having your podcast part of the onboarding journey,
Yeah.
because in ours, it's not a day, right? I mean, it's done globally. It's also done very well locally.
Yeah.
And
What
so
is
wherever
the average length of
organization,
time for onboarding with Slalom?
well, we have a first day checklist,
Yeah.
a 2 week checklist, a 30-day, a 60-day.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's an amazing team, and they definitely want to be sensitive to what you should really know. We don't want to overwhelm somebody, so we really put this into like the 2 week checklist.
Yeah.
Is that this is an amazing resource that you have available
Yeah.
to you to learn a little bit more about Slalom at your convenience when you can. So in onboarding, if I could have done that in the beginning, we've hired so
Yeah.
many, so we're just now getting that much more integrated into onboarding
Yeah.
as we speak. But looking back, that would have been a really good opportunity to have done in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, and I just, we've had such a rich conversation today. It's been so incredible. I think you guys have really been a pioneer in terms of internal podcasting and,
Mhm.
the way that you've implemented it with the organization. So thank you so much, Vimal, for just sharing
Yeah.
what that journey looks like. Cause, as a lot of other organizations are looking at internal podcasting, they're like, okay, but then like, what are the steps and how does it work and how do we market it internally? And, what does the production process look like and how does it look like to book guests and all of that good stuff. So just,
Yeah.
hearing your experience and, even just from a procurement perspective, right? Like bring in legal,
Yeah.
and we're super familiar with that. Like bring it on. We're so excited to talk to you guys about that. In terms of data security, we really thrive. But it's something where it's so important to just bring awareness to that, what's on your checklist. And then also, when people are coming on board to join your organization, like tell them about the podcast because they're so excited to be there. And, it's an ongoing resource and really just builds community within the organization, skills, tools, all that good stuff.
Yep.
Well,
Well
gosh,
said.
Vimal Parker, it has been just such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Norma Jean. I've had a blast.
Absolutely. This has been How to Structure an Internal Podcasting Initiative with Vimal Parker, the Global Sales and Talent Acquisition Content Manager from Slalom. My name is Norma Jean Belenke. I'm the head of events here at Podbean. And you are listening to Corporate Podcasting Smarter, which is our series here about internal corporate podcasting and branded podcasts from Podbean. So we are so excited that you joined us here today. And Corporate Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and monetizing organization and company, and we are a top business and enterprise hosting solution. So if you have any questions about internal podcasting, ask. We've got a link here in the show notes. You can also contact me directly at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com with any questions. We've got some links here for you as well. And Vimal, thank you so much for taking
welcome.
the time to speak with us today. It's been such a pleasure. And we'll have a link as well to your public podcast here in the show notes.